What if Hitler wasn't just a dictator, but the modern reflection of Lucifer himself? He wasn't born with horns, nor was he foretold by demonic prophecies. But the world would soon witness what happens when a man believes himself to be more than human. This is not a typical documentary about World War II. It's a symbolic journey into the roots of the most destructive ego in modern history, rivaled only by the one who, according to ancient texts, dared to defy God himself. In Christian tradition, Lucifer fell for one reason: pride. His crime wasn't murder, deceit, or corruption. It was the desire to claim the Creator's throne, a desire that seems to echo centuries later in the fiery speeches of Adolf Hitler, as he positioned himself as the savior of a nation, the commander of a new empire, the Thousand-Year Reich. But was it just a coincidence? What if Hitler's ego was a physical manifestation of the Luciferian archetype? In the earliest apocryphal records, Lucifer isn't inherently demonic. He's a bearer of light who became lost within himself. Likewise, Hitler began as an ordinary man, a frustrated artist rejected by academia, a soldier wounded by war. But in that pain and humiliation, something darker began to grow: the cult of self, the craving for mass submission, the construction of a new order. Why does every evil empire begin in silence? With a wound? Between the lines of Mein Kampf, we don't just read political strategy, we read a new gospel, a manifesto of distorted faith. And for many, Hitler wasn't merely a political figure, he was almost a prophet, a spiritual guide disguised as a head of state. The crowds hailed him as if they were witnessing something sacred. But what were they really seeing? What if the cult of personality is the modern form of demonic worship? The images are familiar: the frozen gaze, the hypnotic speeches, the occult symbols, the inverted swastika, the midnight rituals, the secret oaths. But few know of Hitler's obsession with esoteric knowledge, arcane runes, Atlantean myths, and hidden powers. Behind Nazi ideology was a symbolic machinery that went beyond politics. It was mystical. Who was truly whispering into Hitler's ear behind the curtain of power? This isn't just a story of madness or ambition. It's a spiritual question. Like Lucifer, Hitler didn't simply want to rule. He wanted to be worshipped. He sought to forge a new morality, to rewrite history, to reshape reality in his own image. And this is where the connection turns dangerous. When the ego surpasses the human and tries to wear the mask of divinity, collapse becomes inevitable. But the cost isn't paid only by the man, it's paid by humanity. What if Lucifer's fall was a warning, not a myth? While the world applauded or turned a blind eye, the stage was already set for tragedy. And just like in heaven before the rebellion, many knelt, unaware they stood before the abyss. Hitler's story doesn't begin with tanks. It begins with silence, with pride, with the desire to become more than what one is. Just like it began in heaven. But what did Hitler really see in the mirror? Was it truly himself, or something guiding him from behind? What do you think about this? Share your thoughts in the comments. What if evil isn't a mistake, but a mirror of the sacred corrupted? The man in the mirror was no longer ordinary. His hardened stare, his rehearsed posture, his voice sharpened like a blade slicing through crowds. Hitler had become a symbol, but a symbol of what? The answer may lie in a name far older than creation itself. Lucifer, the light-bringer, once looked at himself and saw no flaw. He saw a god, and he rebelled. Centuries later, a man wounded by war, rejected by art, and intoxicated with resentment, stared into his own reflection and saw the same ambition, no longer to be accepted, but to be worshipped, no longer to serve, but to rule. The spiritual mechanics of the fall were repeating themselves. What if hell doesn't begin with fire, but with an idea too seductive to challenge? Hitler understood early on, words shape worlds. Just like Lucifer seduced angels with promises of freedom, Hitler seduced the masses with promises of national redemption. He said what people longed to hear, with a voice that sounded like truth, but pulsed like a spell. His speeches weren't just texts, they were rituals. The podiums were altars. The symbols, visual incantations, the swastika spinning counter to the sun, a sign of cosmic rupture. A new spiritual axis was being summoned, and the world didn't see it. Why do so many kneel before ego, thinking they're standing tall? The Nazi machine wasn't just military, it was symbolic. The Third Reich was built like a faith-based empire, with its own dogmas, sacrifices, rituals, and demons. The concept of the pure race, a twisted Eden rebuilt in the image of a new god. The extermination, an inverted flood, cleansing the world through a distorted morality. And at the center of it all, a man who no longer saw himself as a man. Hitler began referring to himself in the third person. Even his own generals spoke of him with an almost mystical fear. Contemporary accounts describe moments where his presence felt supernatural, oppressive, magnetic, nearly irresistible. Who inhabits a man's body when the ego becomes an empty altar? This is where the forgotten archives of history become dangerous. Nazi occultism wasn't a fringe element, it was the engine. The Thule Society, the invocation rituals, the black symbol of the black sun, all point to a deliberate effort to channel unseen forces, ancient powers older than any modern ideology. And who, if not Lucifer, would be most invested in feeding such an ego until the final explosion? What if one man's ego can become the portal to a collective fall? The crowds followed him like heaven once followed Lucifer, until the war, until the blood, until the abyss was revealed. But it's still too soon to fully grasp what Hitler truly invoked. And who answered? What lay behind Hitler's eyes? Was it just human hatred, or a presence hungry for worship? If this struck a chord with you, like this video and help spread the message. What if Hitler never ruled alone, but was merely the voice of something ancient? The SS's secret archives reveal more than military strategies. Between maps and records of extermination, disturbing documents appear, studies on astrology, runas, necromancy, and dimensional portals. Hitler's obsession wasn't just military or racial. It was mystical. It was spiritual. It was demonic. He didn't just want to conquer land. He wanted to rewrite creation, to shape a new man, a new morality, a new era. Just as Lucifer once sought to establish a new order in heaven, Hitler envisioned a complete inversion on Earth. The 1,000-year Reich was meant symbolically to mirror the throne Lucifer once tried to claim. Why are the most dangerous dictators the ones who speak most about destiny? Hitler claimed he couldn't be killed, that nothing would touch him until his mission was fulfilled. Eyewitnesses speak of strange occurrences, bombs that failed to detonate, assassination attempts foiled by mere seconds, secret meetings with mediums and occultists before major decisions. It wasn't just paranoia, it was belief in unseen forces. Inside the bunker, records describe trance sessions, tarot readings, astrological charts used to guide military actions. The war wasn't just political, it was ritualistic. What if every bomb dropped was part of a symbolic sacrifice? At the center of it all, one figure appeared often, Wotan, the Germanic god of war and wisdom. But the inner circle of the Thule, society knew the Wotan Hitler called upon was a mask, a symbol, a code. What if Wotan was just another name for the same fallen entity from ancient times? To the occultists of the Reich, Lucifer had never stopped working. He had simply changed names. And through the inflamed ego of a broken man, he found a new vessel. In Hitler's final years, his gaze changed. It was emptier, more mechanical. As if the human had stepped aside for the symbolic. As if his body had become nothing more than a vessel for something that doesn't bleed, but demands blood. Why do some men seem to carry within them the echo of celestial wars? The Third Reich became the stage for a spiritual war, disguised as a political conflict. The idea of purification, the concentration camps, the experiments on twins and genetic manipulation, all of it points to something deeper, traces of a larger symbolic project. A project of inverted creation, an attempt to turn hell into a new Genesis. And at the center of it all, a man growing increasingly isolated, increasingly possessed by the belief that he was the chosen one, the elect, the redeemer of the world. Lucifer, too, believed he could save creation by taking it from God. This is the seed of a divinized ego, the belief that evil is necessary, that pain is a fair price, that blood purifies. But the real question is, how many had to die to feed that entity? And what if Hitler's fall wasn't truly the end, but the beginning of something that still operates today? Subscribe. What comes next is even darker. What if the Third Reich wasn't just a regime, but a new religion, with Hitler as its dark messiah? While most saw uniforms, speeches, and war, few realized that what was rising in Nazi Germany wasn't merely political. It was an altar, a liturgy, a cult built to replace God with a man, and turn that man into a living legend. In the stadiums, crowds gathered for mass rituals. The speeches had schedules, lighting, silence. Every movement was choreographed. The swastika wasn't just a symbol, it was a seal, a sigil, a visual spell, repeated until it embedded itself in the collective subconscious. Why does every totalitarian empire build temples, not just barracks? The Nazi Party had its own Bible, Mein Kampf, its own creed, racial supremacy, its martyrs, soldiers, murdered traitors, even children who died for the Führer, and its promise of salvation, an eternal empire where purity was worshipped and the different eliminated. Hitler took on the role of prophet, redeemer, and judge. He claimed to have been chosen by providence. And just as Moses climbed the mountain, Hitler climbed the podium and descended with absolute truths. And the people obeyed. Not by force, but by faith. What if blind faith isn't exclusive to religion, but a weapon of the divinized ego? At the heart of the Reich was the Ahnenerbe, a secret organization tasked with uncovering the hidden origins of the Aryan race, not just through science, but through spiritual revelation. They searched for Atlantis, Lemuria, sacred artifacts. They were occult archaeologists, sent to retrieve what Hitler believed would give the new man the power of the ancient gods. But what gods exactly was Hitler trying to resurrect? In 1938, Nazi troops went to Tibet, not for geography, but because they believed the Himalayas hid portals, gateways to the origin of mankind, or, according to long-forgotten legends, to the prison of ancient entities. The question the archives don't answer is, did they find what they were looking for? What if the goal was never to win the war, but to release what had been sealed for millennia? Every religion has its apocalypse. Nazism did too. And Hitler wanted it. In his final speeches, he spoke openly of the end of the world as a final redemption. The idea of total destruction, of redemptive chaos, was theological, as if, by setting the world on fire, he believed a new one would rise from the ashes. Just like Lucifer, who, in destroying the order of heaven, didn't seek chaos, but a recreation in his own image. Why does the destructive ego always disguise itself as creator? The Third Reich fell, but its symbols, ideas, and rituals survived. They spread. They were hidden beneath new names, new flags, new leaders. Because the cult of the divine ego never dies. It simply changes face, language, generation. But what if Hitler's true victory was planting a cult that still thrives in silence today? Share this with someone who needs to see what was hidden. What if the greatest power of evil isn't to destroy, but to persuade? Hitler didn't need to kill with his own hands. All it took was for his voice to be believed. All it took was for his lie to become truth in the mouths of millions. Just like Lucifer, who, according to ancient texts, seduced a third of the angels with promises of freedom. Hitler created a new gospel, one built on illusion, resentment, and false glory. He didn't lie outright. He twisted, distorted, planted doubt. And in the space between doubt and truth, he implanted belief. How many times has history been rewritten by those who scream the loudest? To the Nazis, Jews weren't just enemies, they were living myths. They represented, in their view, the corruption of cosmic order. Just as Lucifer convinced the angels that God was a tyrant, Hitler convinced an entire nation that exterminating a people was an act of salvation. Nazi propaganda was a factory of alternate realities. And its most powerful weapon wasn't tanks, it was language. What if every totalitarian ideology is at its core a religion of lies? The press was silenced, art was censored, language was purified. Only the words that fed the Führer's ego and the nation's delusion remained. The burning books became, symbolically, sacrifices on an invisible altar, the altar of single thought. Just as Lucifer could accept no throne but his own, Hitler accepted no narrative but the one he created. Why does every dictatorship fear the truth if it claims to be right? But there was something even darker, the Lebensborn Project, a social and genetic experiment to engineer the new Aryan race. Children were abducted. Parents were selected as if they were human offerings to birth the new divine man. Often overlooked, this project reveals an even deeper obsession, not just to destroy the old world, but to biologically shape the new one, a literal attempt to become the creator. What if Hitler didn't just want to be worshipped, but to be the god of a new humanity? This symbolic perversion of Genesis reveals the heart of the narrative, an ego that longs to create, but only knows how to destroy. The Luciferian archetype, trading the word of light for the language of shadow. And here's a little-known fact Hitler believed. He was fulfilling a prophetic role. In 1944, he told his generals, "Even if I fall, the world will follow me." A sentence that doesn't sound like despair, but a curse. What's left of us when we believe only our own reflection deserves to exist? The Nazi lies were defeated by force, but they were never undone. They migrated. They changed form. They became symbols, phrases, hidden ideologies, waiting for new vessels. Ego never dies. It just wears a new mask. But who today is wearing the new face of the divine ego without us realizing it? Have you ever asked yourself that? Share your thoughts in the comments. What if human history is just the same mistake, told with different faces? Lucifer fell from heaven because of pride. Hitler fell from glory because of arrogance. And in every era, a new figure rises, a new empire, a new ideology, all carrying the same invisible seed, the ego that believes it's divine. Why do the same dark symbols always return? Even when the names change? The fall of the Third Reich seemed final, but Hitler's death wasn't the end of the cycle. It was the restart. Nazi scientists were secretly taken to the US and the USSR. Their experiments continued. Their ideas were recycled. The occult symbolism of the Reich seeped into cults, governments, and secret structures that still operate today. What if Lucifer's true victory wasn't his fall, but making others fall in his place? Repetition is the trick. Every time humanity rises under a new flag, a new promise of absolute salvation, a new figure demanding worship, the cycle begins again. The promised paradise turns into a prison. Purity becomes massacre. Order becomes ruin. Lucifer wasn't the first to fall. He was the first to teach that falling could be a path to ascension. What if every time we kneel before a savior leader, we're repeating the same pact? The structure is always the same. A profane messiah, a wounded crowd starving for meaning, a common enemy to hate, a central symbol that promises identity. All of this existed in the heavens before Earth. All of this was in Berlin. In 1933, all of this could be here, right now. How many times will we keep falling, thinking we're rising? What Lucifer offered in Eden was choice. What Hitler offered Germany was redemption. But in truth, both offered the same poison, the pride of becoming like God, and all of us drank it. The fall isn't just spiritual or historical. It's psychological, archetypal. It lives in everyone who craves absolute power, in every leader who demands worship, in every people who surrender to fear, to idolatry, to blind obedience. What if the apocalypse isn't an event, but a repetition? Few realize there's a pattern, almost mathematical, almost mystical, behind every great fall. A cycle of 88 years separates moments of collapse. World wars, totalitarian rises, and once again, we're standing at the edge. What are we about to repeat? Without even noticing? Hitler died in 1945, but the idea that possessed him, or that he embodied in, is still alive, reincarnating in new narratives. wearing new masks, feeding off new crowds. But what if the next fall has already begun and no one sees it because now it speaks the language of freedom? Like this, if any part of it made you uncomfortable. What if Hitler never wanted to be remembered, but replicated? The ruins of Berlin hide more than just concrete. They conceal codes, traumas, and ideas that have infiltrated the human psyche. Hitler may have died in a bunker, but his symbolic presence lives on, like an echo in the collective unconscious, like an entity waiting for new bodies, new voices, new stages. What if the true legacy of evil isn't what it did, but what it taught? The techniques of mass manipulation, the use of fear as a tool for unity, the worship of image, the religion of the state, the manufactured enemy, the strategic use of symbols to provoke devotion. It all became a manual, adapted, repurposed by governments, corporations, and modern religions. How many leaders today follow ancient footsteps without naming the ones who paved the way? Nazi architecture was inspired by Egyptian and Roman temples. Every column, every proportion, every square was designed to provoke reverence, not just aesthetic and spiritual. A geometry built to induce submission, to trigger, without words, fear and fascination. Hitler understood what very few ever did, that symbols speak to the unconscious. And the collective unconscious is the true key to lasting power. What if the war of the future isn't over land, but over minds? Declassified documents reveal that after the fall of the Reich, the US absorbed hundreds of scientists, including psychologists, neurologists, and experts in mass control. Operation Paperclip wasn't just scientific, it was symbolic. They transferred bodies, but the spirit of the ideas was never exercised. Yet what if the next form of control doesn't use weapons, but algorithms? The cult of image remains, not on murals, but on screens. The messianic voice still echoes, not on radios, but through feeds. The hatred of the enemy is reborn, not in posters, but in comments. The new temple is digital, but the spirit behind it is ancient. Why does truth disturb us more than comforting manipulation? In Gnostic tradition, Lucifer is described as the one who offers knowledge, but at a cost. Symbolically, Hitler did the same. He offered clarity, a target, a cause, a future. It all seems so simple, and that's what makes evil so dangerous. It doesn't arrive as chaos. It arrives as order. Could the deepest evil be the one that makes us feel safe? Today, when we look at history, we feel distance. But the true legacy of the Third Reich is alive in our systems, in the structures obsessed with performance, image, purity, control, and hierarchy. And the more we forget, the more it grows in the shadows. But what if this symbolic inheritance is about to find a new host? Subscribe. The truth doesn't end here. And what if the entity that once possessed Hitler never truly left? The world has changed, but the stage is the same, and the script identical. When a man rises claiming to be a savior, when he points to an enemy, when he demands purity, order, and obedience, the cycle begins again. What if Lucifer never wanted to be worshipped as Lucifer, but under 1,000 different names? Today, the cult of ego doesn't wear a uniform. It wears a suit. It doesn't stand on stone podiums. It appears on LED screens. It doesn't preach a superior race. It sells the illusion of a perfect, unquestionable, centralized ideal. One state, one truth, one morality. The faces are new. The names have changed, but the shadow is the same. How many modern leaders speak like gods, but rule like demons? The symbolic worship of the self resurfaces everywhere. In populist governments, in authoritarian regimes, in leaders who promise order but spread fear, in speeches that promise light but lead straight into the darkness. Hitler was obsessed with the divine mission. He believed his path was guided by higher forces. That's the trap of the messianic ego. It never sees itself as the villain, but as a tool of some greater destiny. What if evil genuinely believes it's doing good? The spirit of domination, absolute control, and narrative monopoly. It didn't vanish. It adapted. It hides in surveillance tech, in the algorithms that shape collective thought, in political cults where reason kneels before charisma? Are we worshipping a new kind of idol, built on the same old lies? Propaganda once spread through films and radio. Now it travels through social media, faster, quieter, and far more efficient. Hatred for the different, the immigrant, the poor, the disobedient, is reborn, disguised as protection. And like Lucifer, who seduced heaven with perfect rhetoric, today's modern messiahs captivate with intellect and conquer through emotion. Why do we follow those who frighten us, as if they're here to protect us? There is a silent hunger in the world, a hunger for meaning, for belonging, for identity. And that's exactly where the new spirit steps in, occupies, dominates, builds palaces of illusion inside people's minds. Hitler wasn't the only one, just the most visible. But maybe today, evil has learned not to reveal itself so easily. What if the demonic ego has learned to operate in silence? The beast of the apocalypse, ancient texts say, will look like a lamb, but speak like a dragon. That's the image that haunts us. Evil disguised as a solution, control dressed up as care, domination rebranded as progress. And while we keep pointing at the past, the future becomes a reflection of the same spirit, the same pride, the same rebellion. But what if that spirit has already chosen its next host? And what if we're already following it? Tag someone brave enough to watch this till the end. What if Lucifer's ego is also inside you? Hitler was a distorted mirror of humanity, a magnified reflection of what lives within us all. Pride, rejection, the hunger for control, the thirst for recognition. He simply gave visible form to what most people hide in the shadows of their own soul. What if what we hate most in figures like Hitler is what we secretly fear exists in ourselves? Carl Jung warned us, what we don't confront within eventually shows up outside as fate. Hitler didn't appear out of nowhere. He was born from the collective unconscious of a humiliated, wounded nation desperate for identity. The same hunger that quietly grows today in millions of souls. What if the world doesn't need another Hitler? Because he's already fragmented across every inflamed ego. The Luciferian ego doesn't need tanks. It needs mirrors. It feeds on admiration, on micro-kingdoms where the self becomes God. In social media, toxic relationships, workplaces, and self-righteous speeches, the same pattern repeats. How many times have you needed to be right? Even knowing it would hurt someone? Lucifer wanted to be equal to God. Hitler wanted to be the new savior. And us? How often do we seek total control? How often do we treat criticism as an attack? How often do we use words as weapons and call it truth? Maybe hell begins where humility ends. Evil doesn't always need ideology. Sometimes all it needs is vanity, a small desire to dominate. A subtle act of dehumanization. That moment when we stop seeing someone as a brother and start seeing them as an obstacle, a threat, someone beneath us. That's when the shadow enters. Not with screams, but with silence. Not with explosions, but with accumulated decisions. That's how the fall begins, even within angels. How many times have we traded good in the name of pride? Lucifer's legacy isn't just celestial. It's psychological, symbolic, personal. He lives every time a heart lifts itself above others. Every time the I screams louder than the we. Every time knowledge becomes vanity. Every time power becomes the end goal. And that's why Hitler must not be seen only as a dictator, but as a warning. A mirror, a reminder of what happens when the human ego takes the throne and forgets the ground. What if the apocalypse isn't a final war, but an inner surrender to our own reflection? Lucifer fell, ancient texts say, for staring too long at himself. And Hitler fell the same way. And if we keep looking for evil only outside ourselves, we'll lose the only war that really matters, the one happening within. But what if the true end of the world is when everyone believes they are gods? If this disturbed you, that was the point, leave a comment. What if the greatest fall is never opening your eyes? For centuries, Lucifer has embodied the soul's deepest and most dangerous desire, to be like God, not as a creature, but as a creator. Hitler, in his fury and madness, became the earthly echo of that rebellion, A man who didn't just want to rule the world, but to become the world itself. But here's the truth few dare to face. That fall isn't theirs alone. It's the mirror of all humanity, forever dancing between light and shadow, between humility and pride, between love and ego. If the divine throne stands empty, who then sits on it in our lives? The empty throne doesn't just belong to Lucifer or Hitler, it belongs to anyone who loses themselves in vanity, who worships the self above all else, who seeks power at any cost. It's the place where the eyes never close, never rest, never accept limits. And what if the true prison isn't some outer hell, but the cage of our own ego? Apocryphal archives, sacred texts, and hidden legends all point to one conclusion. The deepest evil isn't external destruction. It's the loss of inner connection, the soul abandoned in favor of a distorted image. Hitler fell, Lucifer fell, but the empty throne remains, waiting for the next. And that's where the true horror lives, not in monsters from the outside, but in the ones born within. And if this is the truth, why are our eyes still shut? So what's left to do? Look in the mirror, face the shadow, and choose not to sit on the empty throne. Because the greatest revolution isn't toppling kings, it's conquering your own pride. The throne is still there waiting, and will you rise or kneel? And if all this is real, drop your truth below.